Sure. So today we have Dr. O'Connor joining us, and she is a professor and advisor at NKU in the psychology department. She's going to be talking about forensic psychology, and if anybody has any questions at any time, you can put them in the chat or unmute yourself and ask.
So, I am a graduate of NKU. My undergraduate degree in psychology is from NKU, long time ago. And my master's degree is from Xavier University in Cincinnati, and my doctorate from the University of Cincinnati. And I have always combined practice. You know, I'm a practicing clinician with teaching. Right now I'm teaching full-time and have been for the last 11 years. But teaching and practicing has always worked really well for me. I never really had a lifelong desire to be a forensic psychologist. It's just something that kind of evolved as I moved through my graduate programs, primarily my master's degree program. And I did an internship in the court clinic for Hamilton County Juvenile Court. And that was my introduction to forensics. And I really like it, and it's stuck. So I think from about 1998 until 2008, I did full-time forensics. I didn't engage in private practice other than forensic practice. And I was a psychologist in a correctional facility in Kentucky. My husband's a judge in Cincinnati, so I work in Kentucky because there's a big overlap in our field. And I was a facility psychologist for the Kentucky Department of Juvenile Justice. And the facility that I worked in at that time was a maximum secure facility for violent male adolescents. So you can imagine it was probably pretty interesting. And indeed it was.
All right, we'll go ahead and jump into the questions if that's okay with you.
That's fine.
So the first one we have is, what does a forensic psychologist do?
There are a lot of different things a forensic psychologist can do. There are a lot of subspecialties within forensic psychology. A forensic psychologist is basically a clinical psychologist who works either in the criminal justice system or consults with the criminal justice system. And I've kind of done both of those. So it kind of depends on your specialty, what you actually do. When I was in private practice and doing forensics, I did a lot of competency to stand trial evaluations and risk assessment evaluations. When a person is going to be sentenced, the court likes to know, to the extent that it's possible to know, what is the chance of this person reoffending? Can we risk putting this person on probation, or do we need to incarcerate this person? And so they gain that information by risk assessment evaluations. So I did a lot of those, a lot of sex offender risk assessments for sex offenders who are being paroled from prison. And it's needed to establish what their risk of offending again is, so they know what level of supervision to put them on prior to release. Because you see, society has the right to be protected from dangerous criminals. And so part of trying to give them that protection is assessing how dangerous an offender might be, especially those returning to society from incarceration. Believe it or not, custody evaluations is considered a subspecialty of forensic psychology because it is psychology within the context of the justice and the court systems. Sometimes forensic psychologists do nothing more than give expert testimony in courts. We can do pretrial workups, trying to explain why a person did what they did and getting that information to the court so that trial can proceed. Other forensic psychologists consult with police departments. I have done some of that, selecting candidates for the police academy or people who want to be police officers. They are given a thorough psychological evaluation, and I did some of those. And then finally working in correctional facilities. And I did that for quite a while.
All right. Our next question is, what education is required to become a forensic psychologist?
Well, most of us have doctorates. And there are some universities that are offering graduate programs in forensic psychology. I kind of steer my advisees away from that. And because forensics is a high burnout specialty, and they need something to fall back on. So they can be a forensic psychologist by being a clinical psychologist who specializes in forensics, but they can also have private practice on the side and so on. So you could work in forensic psychology with a master's degree in psychology, but you would need to be supervised by a licensed psychologist. And by definition, a licensed psychologist holds a doctorate. It's possible to work in forensic settings with master's degrees in counseling, even bachelor's degrees in psychology. You could be probation officers. You could be case managers in facilities. So to do what I do, and that is doing a lot of psychological evaluations, you really would need to have a doctorate.
All right, and that kind of answers our next question too. We asked what career paths people can take in forensic psychology. So maybe I'll rephrase that to what career paths have you seen your students take? What kind of roles have they taken on after graduation?
Most of them have gone on to graduate school and gotten at least a master's degree. In psychology, I have one former student who works for the FBI in counterterrorism. And that was her goal all through undergrad school. She wanted to work with the FBI. And some other former students got master's degrees in clinical mental health counseling. And they work in facilities doing case management, working with rehabilitation, that kind of stuff.
Okay. And then you also answered this too about if there are different specialties in forensic psychology. So if you wanted to go into more detail just about the different fields.
Well, probably one of the most difficult subspecialties would be working in a correctional facility. That is It's pretty intense all the time. A less tense career pathway would be to just do evaluations, competency to stand trial, consulting on the insanity plea. Some psychologists help attorneys select jury members, particularly in capital punishment cases, things of that sort. I have done a lot of testifying in court, but it's not something I particularly enjoy. So for me, being a person who just does expert testimony would not be very enjoyable to me. I don't mind when I have to go to court, but I don't want to spend any more time in there than I have to spend. A lot of psychologists like to do pretrial workups, which is a pretty intriguing and fascinating thing, where somebody has committed a crime and they're trying to figure out why this happened. And so they will have psychologists and some psychiatrists evaluate people who have been charged with something and are going to trial. And one of the reasons is we try to determine as best we can, did someone commit a crime because of mental illness, or were there mitigating factors, meaning factors that, yes, this person did a very nasty crime, but were there factors that kind of led this offender down that path? And should the jury know about those to maybe give this person a lesser sentence, not get them off, but give them a lesser sentence? I particularly enjoy doing the evaluations to stand trial and risk assessment evaluations.
And then who do forensic psychologists work with in terms of coworkers and then the people that they're helping or defending?
Well, obviously you work with criminals or people who have been charged with crime. You can also work with victims of crime, and that is one of the areas of forensic psychology. It's kind of a new one, actually, victimology. And so you kind of help people who have been victimized of crime, or let's say someone has been murdered, and you might work with the family, the surviving family, to help them come to terms with what has gone on. And especially if they're going to get the death sentence, you could work with the family of the convicted person to help them through this whole sentencing process. And you work with attorneys, both sides, prosecution and defense. Sometimes defense attorneys will call you to do evaluations. Sometimes prosecutors will call you to do evaluations. So you work with offenders, you work with judges to the extent that you're in the courtroom. If you work in a facility, you're going to be part of a multidisciplinary team. So like the facility that I worked in for juvenile justice, we had our own school there. So I worked with teachers and the principal. We had our own medical unit. So I worked with the physicians and the nurses. I worked with the guards, obviously. And I worked with the residents of the facility and their families when the families chose to be involved. So you work with a wide variety of people.
All right. And then our next question was, what was your educational experience like and where did you go to school?
Well, I graduated from NKU, and that was a wonderful experience, obviously, because I came back to teach. I particularly enjoy school, so I wasn't intimidated by the fact that I was going to be in college for 10 years, graduating with a bachelor's degree and then going on to a master's and then going on to a doctorate. So I thoroughly enjoyed the educational process. So when I went to NKU, we didn't really have to have a minor or a secondary area of study. We could just do our majors. And so I was fascinated by everything in psychology. I wanted to take as many psychology courses as I could. Then but we still had gen ed, so you have to do those things. But then in graduate school, it's very different because you're in much smaller classes. You're not taking anything that isn't related directly to what you're getting your degree in. It's much more concentrated and focused. Then you also, I remember one of the things that was so fascinating for me when I started working at the court clinic, my second year in grad school, I was doing a lot of psychological evaluations. And it was just fascinating for me to see how things that I had learned theoretically at the undergraduate level and continued to learn theoretically in grad school, how they actually were very real when you started putting that into practice, when you started interviewing residents, when you started giving tests and making sense of that test data and putting it together in a report. That was one of the most wonderful experiences, just seeing how all of it came together.
All right. And then if you don't mind going into a little bit more detail about your job now and what it entails.
Here at the university?
Yes.
Okay. I'm the assistant chair of the psychology department, which means that I supervise the academic advising in our department. I teach the psychotherapy course, where I teach people the basic skills of therapy. I also teach a course in forensic psychology and also one in criminal behavior, one in personal adjustment. I have around 200 advisees on my caseload, so obviously I do a lot of advising. And I enjoy working with students on their career pathways. Now, in terms of forensics, I do some freelance consulting. Maybe there's a difficult case going on and an attorney may want to consult with me. I've had some judges consult with me just recently about different aspects of a case. So I'm not doing assessments and things like that right now. I'm just freelancing consultation because I'm so busy here at the university, but love everything that I do.
All right. Our next question is, what kind of skills does somebody need to be successful in forensic psychology?
The first thing you need to be is non-judgmental. It's very important because in many, many instances, you're going to be dealing with humanity at its worst. You will be dealing with people who have done very heinous kinds of things. And being non-judgmental doesn't mean that you approve of whatever behavior that the person engaged in. But what it means is you're going to try to understand that crime from the offender's point of view, and you're not going to pass judgment on it. You can accept them as a human being without accepting their behavior. And those are two very different things. You need to be a good listener. You need to have good analytical skills because you're always trying to figure things out. You know, I had a school shooter in my facility for 2.5 years, and he was obviously under the age of 18. At the same time, I had another mass murderer in my facility who was under the age of 18. So the questions that the court wants to know, why did they do those things? So I've always been very curious about human behavior and why do people do the things that they do? How did they get to this point in their life? And then what are they going to do with the rest of their lives? So you need to be very curious about human behavior. You need to kind of like to solve puzzles, not that people are puzzles, but you need to get bits of information and put them together so that you can give the court a complete understanding of why this crime happened as it did. So you need good listening skills. You need to be non-judgmental, and you need to be patient. You know, by and large, if you're working in the adult criminal system, people aren't going to get better. You know, the purpose of the prison system is not rehabilitation. It is punishment. When you work in the juvenile justice system, the purpose is rehabilitation. And sometimes you can have a very huge impact on someone. So you need to be patient and realize that you're working with a very difficult population and they may or may not change.
And then what are the most common challenges that come up for a forensic psychologist?
Having your credibility doubted on the witness stand by the opposing attorney, that can be very challenging, and you kind of have to be non-defensive about that and not react to what is being said. And I think it can be challenging sometimes working with people whose lives have gone so wrong and that they have engaged in hurtful, harmful behavior towards other people. And it can be very challenging working with those kind of people. You know, if you're going to have a therapeutic relationship, you've got to get them to trust you. And they don't trust very easily. By and large, people who engage in criminal behavior have a lot of trauma issues in their own background. And so it can be difficult working with such people, but it can also be very rewarding in that you do have an opportunity to make a difference in a person's life. You may not change them, but you have an opportunity to make a difference in their lives. And just making a difference means you've been successful.
And that kind of answers our last question, which was, what is the most rewarding part of your job? And if you're able to recall maybe an experience or like something specific that was rewarding, that would be awesome.
Rewarding is kind of relative concept. You know, when you're in private practice and you're working with depressed people and anxious people and so on, you see real progress with those people. And that's very, very rewarding and satisfying. With forensics, your job is different. And so I can think of one case in particular. This young man killed 3 people and wounded 5 others in a shooting when he was like 14. And being able to figure out why that happened and help him learn to live with what he had done. I was a little overwhelmed at that challenge at first because I've never killed anyone. So I'm not sure how you learn to live with that. But together, we found a way to help him live with that. He will be in prison for the rest of his life. And helping him find a way to make that meaningful time. And in fact, he is a mental health technician in the prison where he is residing. So that was extremely rewarding, working with him in that way. And it's also rewarding to me when these young men who really had significant trust issues would trust me and would open up to me to the extent that they could. I found that rewarding. Now, did any of them change? Very small percentage probably changed because we're releasing them when they turn 18 into unfortunate environments. So they don't always change. Excuse me.
Well, that was our last question. So if there's anything else you wanted to share or add while people type their questions in the chat, if they have any questions, and we can get them answered.
I think I pretty much covered it. If you want to go into forensics, I would encourage you to do so. It's a very fascinating field. Oh, I will tell you, it's not like what you see on television. It's not like CSI at all. I've never investigated a crime. You know, I never meet a criminal until after they've been arrested and they're ready to go on trial, or they've already been tried and convicted. So you need to understand that that is drama. Now, there are criminal profilers. Very few psychologists are involved in that. That is usually done by the FBI and law enforcement people who specialize in that. So if that's what you think you want to do, then I would encourage you, yeah, you could get an undergraduate degree in psychology, but I would encourage you to then aim your sights at the FBI, like my one former student did.
Yeah, I was curious about that. I'm a big Criminal Minds fan, and I know they're the behavioral analysis unit in the show, but they do see a lot of action. Is that something that's related to forensic psychology, the BAU?
I know of no forensic psychologists who go and investigate crime scenes. Mm-hmm. They can. I mean, police officers or detectives will ask you, you know, we've got this crime and I'm really baffled by this. What kind of person do you think might have committed this crime? And you can consult with them in that way. But it's not something psychologists do, go out and investigate crimes. Most of us would be appalled by that.
It looks like we have one question that came through.
Okay.
It says, how well does psychology undergrad work as a precursor to law school and maybe even forensic psychology?
It's a very good major for law students. My husband's undergraduate degree is in psychology. So psychology would be very helpful for you to go to law school. I have 3 former students, psych majors, who are in law school now. But if you do that, I would probably have political science as a minor, or writing, English, because you're going to do lots and lots of writing. in law school. Being a forensic psychologist, it's imperative that you have an undergraduate degree in psychology, a bachelor's degree. That opens the door for everything else for you.
I will say my husband, who was also a lawyer, had an undergraduate degree in psychology as well. So it seems pretty popular.
Well, yeah, it's a very versatile degree. You can do most anything with it. I mean, I have former students who ended up being police officers, and they have an undergraduate degree in psychology and a minor in criminal justice. So there are many, many things you can do with an undergraduate degree in psychology.
If there are other questions, I'd like us to go ahead and thank our presenter today.
Thank you, Anthony. That was nice.
All right. Well, thank you to everyone.
Yeah. Thank you.
Have a good day.
Bye.
Bye.